respected seniors, my dear students and dear friends. Today I am supposed to deliver a lecture on recent outbreaks of type 2 diabetes mellitus, but I have planned that I will talk a few words about the recent guidelines, and my aim is not to bore you with several data and several molecular mechanisms, etc. Rather, I will give you the guidelines, a few words and few sentences about the older drugs which we use every day, a few sentences about the newer drugs which are in the horizon, and then we will shift to some real cases which we experience in our day-to-day clinical practice, because at the end of the day we have to manage patients, not the molecules, not the different doses, etc. So I will be very happy if the young PGTs interact with me in the case session. Now let us start with this picture. If there are so many Bengalis in the audience, then probably they can identify this picture. Although the Bengali medium students are not available in many numbers nowadays, but this is a famous picture from Sukumara's Abul Tabul. Can you identify the picture? Anyone? So it is a poem from Thuror Paul, where the Kuro is running after a target, but he can never reach the target. As he runs, the target also runs. So HbA1c is just like that. In most of the cases, the people, the diabetic patients and the doctors, they run after HbA1c, but often they cannot reach the target because of several constraints. Although we all know that lowering of HbA1c reduces the risk of various complications, it reduces the deaths related to diabetes to 21%, microvascular complications to 37%, myocardial infarction to 14%, so all that. But it has been seen that with time, over years, the proportion of individuals reaching target HbA1c is worse. Although the other targets, the BP targets, the cholesterol targets, they have come down, but the proportion of individuals having HbA1c targets, they have come down. There are several drugs. Since 1922, we are using conventional insulin, then sulfonylurea, metformin, AGI, this analog insulin started with Lispro, then the glitazones, glinides, glargine, aspart and other analogs, came the GLP-1 agonists like exenatide, amylin antagonists like pramlintide, came detamine, gliptin, and ultimately liraglutide, and very recently the T2 agonist and also the this SGLT2 inhibitors. So which path to choose? We are often confused because we have so many drugs in our basket, and that's why several guidelines came. But of all the guidelines, mainly the ADA-ESD guideline, the AACE guideline, the IGF guideline, and the NICE guidelines, these are usually considered. So let us see what they have said. In most of the guidelines, the HbA1c target has now come down to 6.5%. Although in few percentage of patients who are very advanced, having advanced disease, elderly patients having so many comorbid conditions, and also whose lifespan is not expected to be more, in those subset of patients, HbA1c target is 7%, but for other patients it is usually kept at 6.5%. So which agent is to select? Usually we select that agent which has HbA1c lowering effect, which is highly efficacious, which has other extraglycemic or pleiotropic effects also, which is safe, which is mostly tolerable, which is easy to take, and of course that the drug should be cheap, although it's not possible all the time. Now this is the ADA-ESD guideline 2012. You can see here that after the lifestyle modification, which is must, metformin is the first drug, and after metformin, if within 3 months the target HbA1c is not achieved, then we may use several other second-line drugs like sulfonylurea, like glitazones, like DPP4 inhibitors, GLP-1 receptor agonists, and this basal insulin. In 2006, when this guideline first came, this GLP-1 receptor agonist and DPP4 inhibitor was not there in the second-line draft, but this has been included later on. And if this target has not reached, even after 3 months with use of these second drugs, then triple therapy should be considered, and the drugs which has not been used in the second line, they should be added. Of course, the GLP-1 agonist and DPP-4 inhibitor should not be used at a time, but other drugs from the basket should be tried. And if within 3 to 6 months that HbA1c target is still not achieved, then we will go for insulin. Basal insulin we can start earlier, but more complex regimens like basal bolus insulin should be started then. But we can skip this if the HbA1c is more than 9% or the fasting blood sugar level is more than 300 to 350%, then we may skip the steps and we may directly go to the insulin. Now this is the AACE guideline. Here there is certain differences. Often there are so many guidelines that we are more confused with the guidelines. That is one problem. But AACE guideline has told that after the lifestyle modification, if the A1C is less than 7.5%, then monotherapy should be started. And if it is more than 7.5%, then don't wait, go for glucagon therapy directly. Although the slide is not very clear, but probably you can see here that here they are more liberal. Not only metformin, but they have recommended some other drugs also like GLP-1 agonists, HEI, DPP-4 inhibitors, etc. as a first line drug in the monotherapy. And sulfonylurea has come down here. Their opinion is that sulfonylurea is not that good because of beta cell dysfunction and all those hypoglycemia, etc., etc. So they have kept it down. And when the dual therapy is needed, then of course metformin is the first line drug and the other drugs come later. And then if it is not made, or if the HbA1c is more than 9%, then directly dual therapy if there is no symptom, or triple therapy if the sugar is very high. And in the triple therapy, the metformin, the first line drug, the second line among them, and a third drug among the all the drugs in the basket should be started. But if the patients have symptoms, particularly the osmotic symptoms, if they have polyuria, nocturia, etc., or any visual problem, then directly go for insulin and other agents, and you may intensify the insulin. That is the idea of ACE guideline. Now coming to the International Diabetic Federation treatment algorithm, here also lifestyle measurement, but it is almost same like the EDA guideline. Metformin should be started first. Usual approach is that, followed by sulfonylurea, followed by basal insulin or premix insulin, or this one of these oral drugs like alpha glucosidase inhibitor or DPP-4 inhibitor or glitazone. And consider the fourth line if the HbA1c is not achieved, target is not achieved, with basal bolus insulin or premix insulin. But there are certain alternative approaches here also. If the metformin is contraindicated or cannot be used for any other reason, then sulfonylurea or HEI may be started, and the other drugs later on also. There are some certain alternative routes. But the usual approach is almost like the ADA approach. And the last one is the NICE guidelines for type 2 diabetes. Here the lifestyle change should be done if the HbA1c is more than 86.5%. Then monotherapy with metformin. If the target is not reached, then metformin plus sulfonylurea or glitazone or DPP-4 inhibitor, again just like ADA. And if it is not reached still, if it is more than 7.5%, then this triple drug therapy. And if it is still high, then insulin therapy. So we can say that this metformin is the first line drug in most of the guidelines. And this is the relative A1C reduction from monotherapy. You can see here that insulin is the most effective one, followed by metformin, and this 6 liter box, they are almost similarly effective, followed by thiazolidinediones. And these other drugs, they are also effective, but to a less extent. And the least effective is alpha glucosidase inhibitors. Now coming to the individual drugs, why metformin has been chosen as the first line drug? There are certain reasons behind it. One is it is highly effective, as you can see that the HbA1c lowering property is very high. It has got minimal hypoglycemia, because for the first line drug, if it is very much hypoglycemic episodes are more, then the patients are scared from the beginning. So it has got minimal hypoglycemia, although few cases have been reported in intermediates. We know that metformin does not cause hypoglycemia, but there have been few reported cases also. And this weight loss, it is very much useful. It is lipid friendly, anti-atherosclerotic. The pro-coagulant factors like phy1 decreases, the fibrinolysis increases. So it is effective in that way also to treat the metabolic syndrome. It decreases the systolic blood pressure, improves CV outcome. UKPDS, already Dr. Jha has mentioned that in UKPDS, only the metformin subset of patients, they had actually improved cardiovascular outcome and others didn't have. So that's why the cardiovascular outcome of metformin is very much important, and so it has been included as the first line drug. And there are certain other properties also. It decreases insulin resistance, so it is insulin NAFLD, insulin PCOS. It has got some anti-cancer effect, whereas we are scared about other two drugs nowadays that has caused cancer. It has been told, although it is not clinically that much significant. And it has got minimal side effects. We know that the serious side effects like lactic acidosis is very, very rare, 3 per lakh patients, so it's almost nil. But the other side effects which are common to metformin, they are not that serious. Gastric intolerance, we don't combat the gastric intolerance just by starting low and going slow. You can combat with vitamin B12 deficiency case, it occurs in 30% cases, but clinically it is not that important. And the important thing is that it is a cheap drug. Now, coming to the sulfonylureas, it is highly effective and the early onset of action. After insulin, the secretagogue sulfonylurea has the earliest onset of action. So, if the patient has osmotic symptoms, if the patient is needs a quick relief from symptoms, then sulfonylurea is a better drug. It is also a cheap drug, particularly the older sulfonylureas. Hypoglycemia here is a major concern, definitely, and ischemic preconditioning, which is a beneficial condition after any acute coronary event, that may be hampered by sulfonylurea because of increased calcium influx within the myocytes. But in the newer sulfonylureas, this effect is almost nil. It is very, very low, and it causes beta cell exhaustion. So that's already a problem with sulfonylureas. Now, thiazolidine diones, we know that it is effective. It is lipid friendly. Good CV outcome has been observed in the in one of the studies. It is very much useful in the cardiovascular diseases. Also, the proactive studies that study. There are certain complication of side effects which are nominal, like peripheral edema in 5% cases, weight gain in 5 to 10% cases. Due to hemodilution, there may be low hemoglobin and hematocrit, etc. But there is increased risk of osteoporosis. That is one problem, because the progenitor cells, they more go towards the adipocyte differentiation rather than towards the osteoblast differentiation. So there may be risk of osteoporosis, and the risk of bladder cancer. We were all aware about it because a few months back it was banned due to this risk of bladder carcinoma. But it has been seen that only the cumulative dose of thiazolidine diones, spironolidine, if it is more than 26 milligram, then only there is slight risk of bladder carcinoma. So practically we may use this drug cautiously. Now coming to the GLP-1 agonist, it is highly effective. It has got certain pleiotropic effects also. It is lipid friendly, it causes weight loss, it reduces blood pressure, systolic blood pressure. The CV risk markers like CFP, like BNP, like PI1, these are decreased with use of this GLP-1 agonist. There is less chance of hypoglycemia unless it is used with sulfonylureas. And in animal models, beta cell neogenesis has been improved, and probably it is useful in that aspect in human being also. But there are certain concerns. Pancreatitis and pancreatitis C have been reported. Although in diabetic patients itself there is more incidence of pancreatitis, so it is basically a theoretical possibility rather than a practical one. Medullary CA thyroid incidence has also been reported to be more in patients using GLP-1 agonists, and high cost is of course a concern. Next one is the DPP-4 inhibitors. It has got moderate efficacy, but definitely the useful factor is that it has low incidence of hypoglycemia. It is weight neutral. There are certain pleiotropic effects here also, and the possibility of pancreatitis is unresolved. Sorry for the spelling mistake. And high cost is one of the concern. Now coming to the two drugs which are in the horizon, which will be soon coming in the market. Probably in the month of May, this drug will be coming in the Indian market also. This SGLT2 inhibitors, the sodium glucose co-transporter 2. It is a low affinity, high capacity glucose transporter located in the proximal tubule, and it is responsible for 90% of glucose reabsorption. Inhibition of this channel leads to decrease in the blood glucose due to increase in renal glucose excretion, because glucose reabsorption is prevented, and so there is glycosuria. But also it also causes increased insulin sensitivity, decreased gluconeogenesis, improved fast-phase insulin release. These are also other effects. And canagliflozin and dapagliflozin, this dapagliflozin has very recently it has become FDA approved and it will come to the Indian market also. And the side effects are vaginal yeast infections, UTI, and increased urinary frequency because of glycosylgia. There is another drug is D2 agonist, the low dose bromocriptine. This has now been used in management of type 2 diabetes mellitus. And there is certain this hypothalamic dysfunction, neurosecretory dysfunction related to the pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes mellitus. It is told nowadays. And it has been seen that in diabetic patients, there is reset of the dopaminergic tone. Early morning hypothalamic dopamine levels are decreased in diabetic patients, and so there is increased hypothalamic sympathetic nervous system activity, which causes increased hepatic glucose production, increased lipolysis and production of free fatty acids, increased lipogenesis, and ultimately there is glucose intolerance, insulin resistance, dyslipidemia, and increased cardiovascular diseases. And if bromocriptine is taken within 2 hours of awakening, then all these things are reversed. There is increased morning hypothalamic dopamine levels, so there is decrease in all these activities, and it improves glucose tolerance, improves insulin sensitivity, and also improved outcome of vascular pathology. Now, nowadays, previously it was told that type 2 diabetes is a disease of insulin resistance and insulin secretory dysfunction. But now the pathophysiology, pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes mellitus is being described by the ominous octet. There are several reasons for the development of type 2 diabetes and hyperglycemia. One is of course decreased insulin secretion, second is increased lipolysis, and so increased insulin resistance at the adipocyte level. Increased hepatic glucose production is there due to increased hepatic glucose insulin resistance. Decreased glucose uptake in muscles, increased glucose reabsorption in the kidney, increased glucagon secretion, decreased suppressed incretin effect, and also neurotransmitter dysfunction. So what are the different drugs doing? So there are synergistic action of different antidiabetics when they are used at a time. Sulfonylurea and meglitinides, they take care of this insulin dysfunction. When we are using metformin, it takes care of this hepatic insulin resistance and also decreases, improves the glucose uptake in the muscles. When we are using glitazones, we are taking care of these adipocytes. This GLP-1 analog and DPP-4 inhibitors, they are actually taking care of this low incretin, and they are increasing the incretin effect, either enhances this effect or it mimics its effect. And this SGLT2 inhibitors, it has also seen to be decrease the glucose reabsorption, and dopamine, this agonist or the bromocriptine, this actually combats this neurotransmitter dysfunction. Now this one is left, the most important drug, insulin. Is it best? Because it is best for some reasons. It has got quickest action. If you want, suppose one patient is waiting for operation, naturally, insulin is the drug of choice. And it combats hyperglycemic symptoms also. Osmotic symptoms are relieved very quickly as it has got quick onset of action. It combats glucotoxicity and lipotoxicity, because when there is high blood glucose level, there is a stunning effect, pancreas cannot secrete insulin, and also due to increased free fatty acid and lipid accumulation in the muscles, the sensitizers cannot act. And at that time, insulin is the best drug definitely, and when the glucose level comes down, then often the oral drugs may act. It preserves beta cell function. It has no maximal dose limit. We can use insulin so far we want. And but of course hypoglycemia is a concern, although the newer insulins, the analog insulins, they have less incidence of hypoglycemia. But still there is always a concern of hypoglycemia. I am not going in details of different insulin analogs because that will take a separate lecture. So we choose. In our opinion, of course, we follow the guidelines, but individualization is taken. So if you go by this, if we follow the guidelines, and if we use drugs in a very rational way, then probably in near future, with all these drugs in our basket, in our armamentarium, we may reach the target HbA1c. Now quickly shifting to the other one.